Welcome to the Executive Function Brain Trainer Podcast. I'm Dr. Erica Warren.
And I'm Darius Namdaran, and we're your hosts. Sponsored by Ivi. Imagine turning your meeting's audio into a live mind map instantly so you remember what matters. Well, try Ivi for free now at ivi.app. That's IVVI.app.
Sponsored by GoodSensoryLearning.com, engaging remedial materials that bring delight to learning.
Hey, Erica, how you doing today?
Good. How about you, Darius?
I'm doing great.
Excellent.
So, topic for today is learning to say no and executive functions. And this is a little bit of a oxymoron or a sort of like contradiction in terms, because executive function is all about getting stuff done and making things happen and setting the course for your life and conducting your mind, conducting your goals, being the captain of your ship, all those sorts of things. It's about getting stuff done. But now we're talking about learning to say no. So let's explore this concept of learning to say no and how it helps with getting things done.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a very, very interesting topic because, yes, there's so much out there that says learning to say yes, but there is a balance between the two. But really going into the no and why that's important in self-care and executive functions. This is going to be a fun conversation.
Yeah, I brought this to the table because we talked about this before, because there's this zoom and mute function where you have to zoom into something and sort of mute out the rest of everything else in order to focus on something and get it done, And learning to say no in very simple terms is to say yes to something, you have to say no to something else. And often to say yes to something, you often have to say no to a lot of other things. And it can be quite challenging for people, especially if you're a creative thinker, a problem solver, an idea person. You've got so many opportunities, you can see all the opportunities that you just want to keep your options open. And in doing so, you actually close yourself down from getting anything done. And an example of this would be, I remember when I was traveling around Europe as a young person, I read this book that said, in order to enjoy your freedom, you must limit it. So in order to enjoy your freedom to roam around Europe, France and Spain and Greece and Vienna and Germany and Denmark and the UK and all these places I could go to, you're not going to actually enjoy your freedom unless you limit it. And so you have to decide, I'm going to go to Rome, and then I'm going to go to Florence, and then I'm going to Vienna. But you could have gone to another 10 different places at the same time on the route and spent an hour in each, hopping off one train onto another train, and all you ever see is the train stations in these
Right.
places.
You get the surface, but you miss the depth.
Yes, that's right. So you think you're saying yes to everything, but you're actually saying no to everything in some way. You're not actually going deep on anything. So in order to say yes to a person, have a relationship with someone, you say yes to them and you say no to other people. I mean, it's kind of simple, but let's kind of take this principle and look at executive functions in particular, working memory, inhibitory control, and cognitive flexibility in particular, and then fit them in together into this sort of meta cognition, executive function, how no is just a really helpful thing to do in the right way at the right time.
And I've got a story to share that works really well here. I remember a couple years ago, I decided to go into yes, that I would say yes to everything. And it really did. It opened things. It helped me to reach new places, but it also created a sense of overwhelm. So it was very interesting. By going into the yes, it led me to the no.
Yeah, do you think it's different for different? I think it's probably different for different people. I mean, some people are more default towards yes, and some people are more default towards no. And maybe it ties in with cognitive flexibility, that maybe if you're a bit more fixed in your thinking and linear in your thinking and determined in your thinking, you might say, this is the path I've set. I don't want to do that. Don't want to do this. This is the way I'm going. That's it. So you stick on your path. That's a really great ability for many people. And but too much, no, 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 this is what I'm doing, makes you rigid. And then too much the other side, yes, 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 yes. You've got extremes on both, don't you?
Well, it makes me think of the ocean and the waves. The waves coming in is the yes, and then the waves pulling back is kind of the no. And perhaps there is some type of balance, because when we go too much into the no, that can limit us. If we go too much into the yes, that can overwhelm us. And perhaps part of life, like a breath, is kind of, or even you could think of it as like putting your foot on the gas is the yes, and then, putting your foot on the brake is the no. But understanding what each of them can do for you is vital. So
Yeah.
that again, you're driving your own cognition, that you are conscious. And we are going to have an episode very soon on that, because I am so into that. So when we're conscious, we're able to control when is the most appropriate time to say yes and when is the most appropriate time to say no. Because when we're not conscious, we go into these subconscious patterns and it answers for us. And then we kind of get stuck and we stop growing.
Yeah, you're not really being the executive of your life at that point. You're on autopilot.
That's right. You lose executive functioning.
Yes. We need autopilot. We've talked about that. We need automaticity in certain things, and we need consciousness in other things, like automaticity in terms of reading, writing, lower level processing things, lower level functions are really helpful. Habits are really helpful to automate certain lower level tasks so that you've got
Yeah.
more capacity for the conscious executive function tasks.
And you could use the metaphor of camping versus hiking for that as well. So when you're camping, you're saying no to moving on, and you're going a little bit deeper, and
Ah,
you're
yes.
experiencing the what you have there, and you're in the campsite, and
Yes.
you're
Yeah.
getting to know the campsite. And then there's a time where you're like, okay, I'm done. I'm ready to move on.
Yes.
And then you start to hike, and then you're going in,
Yeah.
as you say, you're going, yes, yes. You're
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
into the
Yeah.
yes, okay.
Yeah.
Expansion, contraction. I mean, the whole universe, that's such an interesting theory about how we always thought that the universe was in constant expansion, and we're discovering that there are aspects where it's contracting. So I guess we're getting right down to almost a yin and yang, and those dualities of being conscious of both of them is really important.
Interesting, that camping analogy. Let's take that for example. I like the camping and the hiking. So you're on an adventure, okay?
Mm.
So part of that adventure is the hiking part, and you've got your camp on your back, and you stop, and then you set up camp, you know. So both are yeses and both are nos. Yes, camping is yes, we're going to sit here, we're going to rest, we're going to have this beautiful view over the lake, we're going to get to know this area, we're going to have some food. This is going to be, we're saying yes to settling in this spot for a while.
You're zooming. You're zooming in.
Yes, yes, and you're muting out the rest of the trail and so forth.
Right.
Yes. And so you're saying no to carrying on walking.
Right.
No, another part of you say, "Oh, we've got to keep making ground. We're behind. We've got to keep getting the miles going and so on." And you're like, "No, no, no, actually, we're here to find a good spot. Let's settle down here." So there's yes and there's no. There's whenever you're saying yes, there's always a no. Whenever you're saying no, there's always a yes. So it's both, it's like when you're saying, let's switch it and say, okay, campsite, and then you say, guys, I think it's time to stop and pack up camp and go hiking. Yes, let's keep going on the road. You're basically saying, no, let's not stay here anymore. Do you know what I mean? That
Yeah, well, I mean, it gets back to that whole concept of extremes are actually, they kind of meet.
yes,
There's a similarity between the extremes. And and that part of life is balancing extremes. But it is nice to zoom in to the no, which is what we're going to do today.
Okay, so what
What's the value of the
I
no?
I think it might be quite nice to break it into our three kind of executive function categories of working memory, inhibitory control, cognitive flexibility. So working memory is about filtering information, inhibitory control is about focusing, and cognitive flexibility is about adapting. So filter, focus, adapt. Okay. And I kind of think of working memory as this temporary moment where you've got a huge amount of information coming in, and you have to decide what's important and what's not important. And what's important in your working memory then gets moved to either kept, saved in your memory or a notebook or recorded, and what's not important just gets deleted. It doesn't go anywhere.
You know what's interesting? What came up for me when you were talking is like working memory is like a straw. It's like you're sipping. You're sipping in a piece of reality.
Yes,
You know what I mean? And the straw limits the capacity somehow. And then when you're processing it, you're tasting it. I've never thought about it that way, but it just
it's an
kind of
interesting
it
analogy. An
popped
interesting analogy.
it
I
popped
think,
into my head when we were when but of course you run into the problem of that I love the idea of the episodic buffer being the stage. And like
yes.
so you could almost think of it as like a hose, but it's not. In other ways it's big. It's big. You're pulling in so
Well,
much.
well, I think what's happening with the working memory is that I think it's really helpful for me to think of it as a filter. Okay. So, with your working
There
memory,
there's a part of it that's a filter. Later on, it's a filter. In the beginning, it's like multiple straws all bringing in information
yes,
onto the
yes.
stage. And then that's the place where it needs to be filtered.
That's right. So it's kind of like, let's think of it like this. The analogy would be, let's say a table, okay? You get given a bunch of information very quickly, a batch of bits and bobs from life in that moment, and it gets dropped on the table, and your brain is saying, this is important, that's not important. That floater in your eye is not important. That color of the sky right now is not important, but that car on the road over there is very important because it's coming towards you and you're driving right now and you need to pay attention to it. So your working memory is taking in information, putting it in a batch, filtering through it very quickly and deciding what's really important and then saving what's important.
I have an idea. What if it is a funnel with a filter on the bottom?
Yes, I would. I get that. Yeah, I agree. Yes, a filter. And the interesting thing about the filter at the bottom of the funnel is that if you don't clear out that filter, it's not like the water's going to keep going. It needs to be constantly emptied,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Right.
It
Or you get a bottleneck.
That's right. One of the things that happens when you watch people when their working memory gets overloaded. So often people who are feeling very stressed get their working memory overloaded, or they've got smaller working memories because of dyslexia or ADHD, or they've got some brain fog, or they're just really tired. This can limit your working memory. And when that happens, there's something really intriguing and that is the person registers that they understand what's just been said to them, but they don't remember it at all.
They don't fully process it.
Yeah, because it's
They
not got
hear
through
it,
the filter. They
but they
hear
don't
it,
process it.
yeah, but it sort of falls off the table, because the table is full, it hits on the pile of table and it slips off. The
The
filter's
filter is
blocked.
clogged.
Clogged.
Yeah, it's
And so the
clogged.
water
Yeah.
flows down and out. And so you've had that conscious, I hear what you've just said, but I don't remember it because the filter of your working memory gets clogged.
Right? Right. You lose capacity to process.
And so I think what happens with no and working memory, okay, when you start saying to your brain, No, I'm not interested in this. Yes, I am interested in that. It's instructing your reticular activating system, that thing in your back, back of your brain that's filtering, to say, ignore that, ignore that, ignore that. And it starts to become blind to it, which is literally why we're blind to the blind spot in our eyes. Our eyes have a blind spot, and it is a black spot in your eye that if you were not filling in that gap, you would see a black spot in your eye, but your brain is filling that in. So your brain is basically saying, delete that black spot and delete the floaters that are coming down your eye unless they're super huge and feel a bit weird. And you're like, oh, there's something different here. That's etc. And there's all sorts of things that are being filtered out by our sight, by our mind. And that's part of this working memory process as well, is filtering out information and finding what's important, and then taking what's in that filter being and storing it somewhere safe, short-term memory, or in a notebook, or taking a photo, or storing it basically.
That would be long-term memory. And also dipping into long-term memory to create meaning and
Yes,
connection and deeper learning. So yeah, so the no is ultimately your ability to either consciously or subconsciously, right? Because
yes,
you'll get no's both consciously and subconsciously.
absolutely, absolutely.
In fact, the no's of the subconscious really limit our ability. And it's funny, it makes me think of people talk about manifesting. Manifesting is about getting rid of those subconscious no's.
Yes, and in a way, what you're doing is when you set a goal, for example, you've got a vision board or you've got a goal, something set on your sights, you're basically instructing your unconscious mind to say, this is the goal, this is the target, and then your unconscious mind is starting to filter information that is relevant towards that goal. And that influences, I think, your working memory and your ability to filter information, what your brain latches onto and saves, and what your brain ignores.
I know that when I'm trying to instigate change in my own life, it's a matter of being conscious of my subconscious patterns and saying, no, I'm not going down that path anymore. I'm blazing a new path. But we get right back to that duality of there's always
Yeah,
a yes and a no.
yes.
And executive functioning is all about being able to conduct the yes and the no. And if we can, then that is really the creates the ability for us to be our best.
Yeah. So we've talked a bit about working memory, and I think when we start saying no to certain things, I think unconsciously it starts to filter and maybe give you our working memory a little bit more relief, because it's very clear we don't want this. Delete, 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 take that off the table, take it off the table. Oh, I found the one or two things that are important and valuable. Let's deal with that. And we're doing that all the time.
A bottleneck will never clear unless they turn off some of those or shut down some of those lanes, right?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people, I mean, take a student who's studying, okay? And you often find this with a student who's studying, they're hearing a lecturer talking and everything seems important. And they're taking notes and they're trying to write everything and everything seems important. It's like, I've got to capture absolutely everything. And it becomes like a
Bottleneck.
transcript. Yeah, it becomes
Yeah.
like a transcript. And you're trying to clear your mind of everything by writing it all down. But what happens is you're not filtering anymore. And really, that is the goal of learning, is to learn how to filter the information. And
To filter, but not over filter.
that's right. And that's
It's
the balance,
very
isn't it?
interesting. Yeah, it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
I kind of explain it to students like this, to say, language is like delivering an Amazon parcel to someone. Okay. When you're speaking a lecture to someone or being taught something, the teacher is trying to deliver a package of information. And that package that gets delivered is language, words. And what they're trying to do is safely deliver that package to you, which is one core concept. Okay. Now, that package, we need the cardboard box for the Amazon delivery driver. It's got to be in a cardboard box with some padding inside, and then the little box of the thing that you need. And then inside of that box is the thing that you need with some little instruction manual. So when you get that box, what you're doing is you're unpacking that box. You take the box out, you take the padding out, you get the little box of the item, you open the box of the item, you've got the instruction manual, and you've got the item. It's a tiny little thing in comparison to all of that padding. And it's the same with language. And in a way, that's what we're doing when we're filtering information. We're kind of unpacking to find the core idea.
And it's so important that we have the time to unpack. It's interesting because one of the things that I notice in education is due to technology, teachers, when they prep for a lecture now, they present it in a way where there's often not enough time for the students to unpack the package. They're like saying, here's a package, and then here's the next package, and
That's
here's the
right.
next package.
That's
And the
right.
student's like, wait a
Absolutely.
minute, I don't even have time. I haven't even looked at the first package yet. Or I'm looking at the first package and they're on the third package. And, it's something
Absolutely.
that we have to be really aware of, that we have to give people the time to unpack these packages. And of course, we're talking about processing speed now. Some
Yes.
people need more time to unpack, and some people need less time to unpack.
Well, that's why I'm a big advocate of mind mapping as a principle, because that's a different way of unpacking information as it's coming to you. So instead of taking notes down in linear format where you're trying to, capture the box inside of the box, that's kind of the notes, okay? And you've got lots of linear notes. You unpack it into something visual, some keywords with a branch underneath as a connection with an icon on it, and you start distilling it down into core words and ideas. I kind of think it's a combination of time and tools. I've noticed a lot of students get settled into, oh, my job here is just to take packages of information, take the boxes and stack them up in my hallway, and then eventually stack them up in my garage. And in 2, 3 months' time, I'll go through all of the boxes, I'll empty it all, and I'll put together this wonderful creation of all of the different elements, which is pharmacology or physiotherapy or whatever that subject is. I'll do it when I start revising for the exam. But what the dream is to unpack it as you're getting it, and you've got the joy of finding that little element, and you can play with it in your mind, store it on a shelf somewhere, and next week, what's the next package you're going to give, and how does it fit with that previous bit of information? So once you get into that mindset that my goal is not to store all of this packaging, but to unpack it as quickly as possible to get to the core concepts, keywords, and ideas so that I can really work with them. That once you've got that, you start looking for the time and the tools.
It's so interesting. So what basically what we're saying is that we have to be careful not to get too far into the yes and too far away from the no. And we have to be careful not to get too far into the no and too far away from the yes, because it's all about, I mean, I think of spaced repetition. Spaced
Yeah.
repetition is that we're bringing in a little bit of no and a little bit of yes all the time, so that we're not overwhelming our system at any time, because you can overwhelm it in the beginning or you can overwhelm it at the end. But if we sprinkle,
Yeah.
to get to where you need to go, if you're putting your foot on the accelerator, but also on, there's certain times where you have to stop. You have to
Well,
stop.
let's go back to
To go.
the packaging. Okay. What I'm basically saying is the no is for no packaging. I don't want any packaging. I don't want the cardboard box. When it comes in the
Uh-huh.
door, I don't want the cardboard box. I'll put that in the recycling. I don't want all the padding round about it, the paper and so on. Put that. I want the little box. And now it's safely in my mind, safely in my house. I'll safely put it on the shelf. I don't need the box, the big cardboard box with delivery box and all of that information. So basically, the no in this scenario is no packaging. I just want the stuff, the actual stuff I ordered.
That's like asking for a summary. You
It
could
is
put an or you can give an article to ChatGPT and say, give me the gist.
It is, and something with Ivy that I found, Ivy, my app, is doing that in terms of taking the recording, doing the transcript, and then pulling out the keywords and the branches. Often, what I found with AI and summaries is it makes a decision on what's important. And that's a big problem.
Well, we all do, and that's the funny piece about it. And that's why I do like mind maps because you can zoom into the details or you can
Yes,
zoom out and see the big
that's right.
picture.
Yeah,
So what's great about mind maps is that it enables you to capture an awful lot.
yeah,
And you can decide how deep you want to go into it. But you're right. I mean, we all have to be very careful about what we say no and what we say yes to.
yeah. And so let's take this example of working memory. I don't want packaging, I want the actual item. And that's what your working memory is pretty much doing all the time. What's the
Right.
packaging? What's the actual item? What's the packaging? What's the actual item?
The
Yeah,
knowledge versus the fluff.
yeah. I
What's the
mean,
heart? What's the heart of the message?
yeah, like often a teacher will tell a great story to illustrate a point, but you don't need to remember the story. Just need to remember the point of the story.
Oh, that makes my heart sad because the stories are so fun.
They
That's what
are
brings,
fun. They're great. But the thing
right,
is, they are packaging. They are
right,
language that is
right.
trying to transmit a core concept that can often be distilled down into one key word, you know?
But it's so interesting because the stories are so memorable. And then that goes back into memory strategies. And what we often do is we'll create stories to make them memorable because stories are memorable.
Well, I'll give you an example of the best of both worlds here is the
Mm.
tortoise and the hare. Okay. I could spend 2, 3 minutes telling you the story of the tortoise and the hare, but that's such a powerful story that when we say the tortoise and the hare, we know exactly what that is. Tortoise and hare. We know what that means. Slow and steady wins the race. The hare's arrogance about being faster and going to sleep halfway through, and then the tortoise just keeping on plodding and then getting to the finish line and winning. Tortoise and the hare. So we've been told the story. The teacher needs to tell us the story. We need to actually understand the story, experience the story, feel the story, understand the moral of the story. And then we can get rid of the packaging because we've got the tortoise and the hare as two little ornaments, as it were, in our mind. And we've got this image,
The lesson.
the
It's
lesson,
just
the
boiling it
core.
down to the
Yeah,
lesson.
yeah. And so that is the essence of, in my thinking, what's often happening unconsciously with the working memory, trying to unpackage unnecessary information and find
Right.
those core concepts and then say, this is relevant. It's important to remember the story of the tortoise and the hare. Let's put that somewhere safe.
Yeah, I see there's a huge piece of working memory is saying no, 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 no.
Yes,
And then yes.
yes,
But it's very interesting because then to take that information and put it into long-term memory, it's fascinating. It's fascinating. But
we
I
have to
definitely
make it
see
memorable and visual and a story,
that then
etc.
we're
Yeah.
then we're going a little bit back into the yes again. So which is well, it all depends on how you word
Well,
it. The bottom line is you can yes or no any of these things. But I do think that there's some value in just going into the no. And the no for working memory is, as you're saying, is filtering.
yeah, filtering,
Filtering the packaging, saying, yeah, yeah, okay. All
yeah,
right, good.
yeah, yeah,
But what's the heart of it?
yeah.
Let's move on to inhibitory control.
Well, inhibitory control is the ability to focus.
It is. It's a few other things as well, because we don't want to forget that there is emotional regulation in there, and we don't want to forget that there's metacognition in there, which is
Yes.
kind of it's focus, but it's also almost chewing the cud.
Well, inhibitory control is fundamentally what is the yes. Let's focus in on the yes. So inhibitory control is
We're focusing on the yes, but we're saying
focusing on the yes
no
and
to
saying no to what is not the yes.
right, right. It's putting on those blinkers that we've
Yeah,
talked
that's
about.
right.
It's
Yeah.
it's it's limiting our vision,
Yeah.
so to speak,
Yes.
so that we're not overwhelmed.
Yes.
But there is those other two senses within inhibitory control, which is the management of emotions, where I suppose where there is some no's that
Well, I
happen
think the thing
within there?
about emotional regulation, what do you think? I think of emotional regulation with regard to inhibitory control as managing your emotions in order to stay on the yes. So you might get upset about something that's trying to rock the boat and knock you off kilter and distract you and pull you away. It could also be the other way of emotional regulation in terms of managing your emotions to drive you towards wanting the yes.
Right. Yeah. And then, of course, the metacognition, which is, I guess you are focusing, you're going deeper. And metacognition is really kind of that chewing of the cud. It's more of the processing. It's interesting. I think there's processing that happens in all three: working
Oh
memory,
yeah,
inventory
absolutely.
control, and cognitive
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
flexibility. There's just a lot of processing going on.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And processing is a combination of this no and the yes.
An analogy that I would use, I often find sailing a very useful analogy for myself. And I know a lot
Yeah.
of people listening might not be sailors, but they've been on the boat, they've got the idea of how a boat works. I think of working memory, filter, focus, and adapt as three characters on the boat. Okay. So working memory is like the lookout at the front of the boat, looking out for useful information, key waypoints, rocks, buoys, buoys,
Right. That so that's
markers.
that's the funnel piece where
That's the filtering
we're
funnel coming
funnel
in.
filter.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then the working memory shouts back to the person on the tiller, the wheel or the rudder, and saying, "Oh, there's a boat ahead of us. We're just about to we're nearing a boat. Watch out for that boat." And the person on the tiller is saying, "Well, we're going in that direction, but there's a boat there, so I'll just move over this way a little bit and then come back on." That's inhibitory control. That's staying on course, holding your course, staying focused on, yes, we are going to this destination. I'm going to get us to the destination.
Right.
Cognitive flexibility
Staying on your path.
is on course. How do you steer the course? And then cognitive flexibility is the ability to say, oh my goodness, the wind has blown us this way, or the tide has pushed us this way. I've looked at the map and I've said, I know we think we're here, but actually on the map, we've been pushed over here. So we need to change our course to compensate for that. And that's cognitive flexibility, that ability to adapt to get to where you want to go as circumstances change. And so that's like the chart reader, the strategist on the boat. But it doesn't stop there. Those are three crew members. Then there's the captain. And the captain is the metacognition. The captain is, I have decided that we are heading to this port destination. This is our goal. The person on the helm, the cognitive inhibitory control is saying, right, that's my next waypoint. But the captain is holding a much bigger view of what's happening in the whole landscape of things and deciding the destination.
I might put the captain in the area of higher level executive functions. But I think
Ah, yes,
metacognition
yes.
is kind of a higher, I think of it as like if you think of snakes and ladders, did you ever play that game?
Yeah, yeah.
Like metacognition is like is a little ladder to higher level executive functions.
Oh, so you're thinking of metacognition as joining all of those three together suddenly to give you a boost, like a turbo boost up.
It's just, yeah, it's a ladder. It's a ladder.
Okay.
I loved that game Snakes and Ladders when I was a kid. But yeah, it's interesting. So
Why is it a ladder? Go into that a little bit more because I'm quite intrigued by that. Why do you characterize it as a ladder?
because it's kind of deep processing. It's a ladder into long-term memory. It's a ladder of processing information, utilizing the tools of working memory. And then you have to use the higher level executive functioning skills like planning, time management,
Yeah,
organization.
yeah.
So it's an interesting concept, metacognition, and traditionally they put it, I've seen it categorized under inhibitory control, which is really interesting because you could argue that it could be placed in any one of them, but it's
Right.
really kind of just this, to me, it's like a little quick elevator trip into higher level executive functions.
Okay.
Because
Right.
we have to kind of use some of those skills.
Okay, so inhibitory control in this analogy is you're steering the car or steering the boat and you're staying on track to your destination.
You're staying on your path.
Yeah,
If we go with the hiking
yeah.
metaphor. Hmm.
So you're basically saying, yes, yes, this is my destination.
And
Something hits
no,
you. No,
no.
no, 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 no. If I'm driving along, it's kind of like, oh, there's a nice ice cream shop. Let's stop. And it's like, no, no, we're keeping on going. Or, oh, there's a nice, rainbow in the sky. And then your steering goes off because you're looking off the road. And it's like, no, no, you're focusing in on the road. And yeah.
So let's go into the no of cognitive flexibility, because that's interesting, because a lot of people that are very rigid thinkers, they're over knowing.
Yes.
They're over knowing. They're saying, no, 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 this is the only way. This is my way. I don't even want to look at other ways of doing it. But you can always flip it and say they're just saying, yes, 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 my way is the only way. It's all in how you think about it.
There's an interesting take on this, which is if you say no to unnecessary things, then you increase your capacity to be flexible and adapt. So like let's say you're staying focused on your lane, you're saying no to a number of things so you can achieve your goal and your destination. There's an aspect of that that gives you a little bit more cognitive space to, if something does happen, you've got some cognitive space to adapt. I think there's some element of that with that gives you cognitive flexibility. I think you still need that default desire to be cognitively flexible, but I think let's assume you've got that default desire to be cognitively flexible and you practice that. You can be so overwhelmed with so many options and you're saying yes to everything that you can't adapt. You're just saying yes to everything and you're just being led.
Well, you ultimately, in the beginning, you say yes, and then you make a choice and you say no. Because really, what you're doing is you're looking at, all right, what are all the different options? And you're looking at all the different options to choose one.
Yeah.
What is the best solution to this problem? You have to look at many different ones, and looking at different perspectives is so interesting. I got my coaching certification, and one of the activities that they did with us that I really, really loved, and I'm like, oh my God, this is a cognitive flexibility activity, was having a problem, discussing a problem with somebody, and then investigating it from different perspectives.
Mm.
So here's your problem. Okay. How do you think your mother would view that? How
Mm.
do you think your dog would view that? How do you think God would view that? How do you think a table? You can even get into inanimate objects. And it's a fun activity, but it's really interesting how when you fully go into these different perspectives, you find these little gems. And then ultimately you make your decision on what you're going to do, but it opens you up to possibilities so that you can get out of perhaps a bottleneck or you're just feeling like you can't move through something, looking at the different perspectives. But every perspective is made up of yes and no's. A perspective is a perspective and it's blocking out all the other perspectives. But ultimately, in order to be cognitively flexible, we have to open up to the yeses to then say no again.
So you're basically looking at it through multiple perspectives. And once you've sort of done this 360 scan from different perspectives,
Yes,
you can then come down and make a decision, right? Okay, we're going to adjust our course and go in this direction
right.
because you can't do all directions all at
That's
once.
right. I'm going to
Yeah.
take the wisdom, and perhaps no one of them is the right course. It could be a combination of them that lead you somewhere very new,
You
or
know,
that trigger a creative new idea. But it's interesting how when you really look at all of these different viewpoints, it really can guide you to something out of the box, which is just so refreshing.
I did this exercise with AI that relates to this because you can ask AI to look at the same thing from a different perspective. And
Yeah.
you could say, here's a scenario. Look at this as if you're my mom. Look at this as if you're my boss. Look at this as if you're a table. And all of those different examples that you gave, you could ask an AI to take on that role. And it's fascinating because they can give you that feedback and then it can give you that feedback. And then you look at it and you go, well, that's an interesting perspective. And then another perspective, another. And a practical application for that, for cognitive flexibility here is, let's say you're going to write a letter to someone or a document to someone, and it's important and you want to be persuasive. Let's say a blog post, okay, or a letter. You might write that letter and your first thinking is, how would this letter look like to someone from a grammatical point of view, decent English? And you look at it and it goes through it and goes, well, from a decent English point of view, proofread it, this is what it would look like. And oh yeah, that is what it would look like. Great. Okay. So it's acceptable from a presentable from a grammatical point of view. But then you could ask AI to say, look, this is my ideal reader, like a 18-year-old student at university who's got dyslexia and ADHD and is looking for some software that can help them with their note-taking skills, for example, if I take an IVI example. What would they think of this document? And IVI could look through it and go, oh, they would like this, but they wouldn't like that. That would seem a bit confusing, etc. Oh, that's interesting. And then you'd say, if you were the student's parent and you came across this document, what would your take be on it? Oh, well, if I was a parent, if you were a dyslexia assessor, what would your take be on it? If you were the father, if you were, whoever, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, Goblin Tools has that,
Oh,
you know.
really?
Yeah, they I forget which one it is that, but there's one that will kind of help you to look at different perspectives, and which is really cool. But this makes me think of a story. Sometimes the answer is right there, right? It's right there and we're not seeing it.
Yes.
And sometimes it's not even that you're cognitively inflexible. It's just like it just didn't dawn on you. And
Yes.
if you're comfortable hearing different perspectives, it can really assist you. And I'll give you a funny story, which is I have this big half moon window right in front of me. And there's a time of year where the light comes through the window and it blinds me, but it's like late spring, early summer, and it happens for about 2 months. And so every year I'd be like, okay, I've got to put something in the window. So I'm sure you remember this happening, right?
Yeah.
And I've got to put something in the window to block it so that I can kind of hide myself behind the shadow of that thing, and have come up with so many different strategies of and buying things and making things out of cardboard and all of these funny things. And then one day I walked into my office and I was like, "Oh my God, I have a I have a screen that I use for watching movies. It's right over here. And all I ever had to do was pull the screen down." And when I realized that I'd been like brainstorming this and buying all of these things and doing all of this stuff, thinking, oh, this is being so creative and that's a cool idea and I could do this and this all along, the solution was right there. But it was a solution for another purpose. But it's interesting how if we can be cognitively flexible, sometimes there's those moments where we're like, there's just no easy solution when there actually is. And I think AI is a really cool tool for being cognitively flexible. And particularly in those moments when we get something that triggers us, because when we get triggered, we become cognitively inflexible because we are triggered. We're in a state of an emotional reaction and we're not as open.
Yeah. So in a way, the title of this podcast is Learning to Say No, or our working title at the moment. I don't know what the final,
Right? We could change it.
we could change it, but our working title is Learning to Say No. But the real question here is learning to say no to what? Okay. So in the working memory realm, it's learning to say no to the packaging, the padding. In the inhibitory control realm, it's learning to say no to anything that takes you away from your
Path.
destination, your path.
Right, right, right.
And in the cognitively flexible, what are we learning to say no to?
Our own stuck limitations, our own stuckness, right? We're learning to look at the map. We're learning to pull out the map and saying, oh, what are all the possibilities?
So we're saying yes to this 360 view of the map and kind of seeing it from different perspectives. So we're saying yes to different perspectives.
Or you could say, I'm saying no to I'm willing to consider opening, I'm at a crossroads and I'm willing to consider a new path.
So you're saying no.
No to limitations. Are you saying that? Yes. I mean, you can turn it
You're,
around and
well,
you
no,
can
let's just
call
stay.
no yes and yes no.
No, but in this, let's use it for it's. You're saying yes to seeing the possibilities and the options, but you're saying no to this kind of. It's got to be
Saying
my way. It's
you're
this.
saying no, it's not working. It's not. It's not
Well,
working.
I think sometimes one of the problems with cognitive flexibility is cognitive inflexibility is it's got to be my way. You know,
Yeah.
it's got to be my way. I've decided this is the route we're taking. This is what we're doing. But then someone on the front of the boat saying, yeah, I know this is the route we're taking. I know what your map's saying, but there's a big rock in the way and we're just about to hit
There's
it.
a waterfall coming.
Can we please change direction? And I go, no, no. It's kind of like what would that be saying? Oh, I suppose you can say no to stubbornness or no
Yeah, yeah,
to
yeah. Stuckness, stubbornness, stuckness.
darkness
You're
or
saying, no, I'm not going to be unconscious anymore. I'm going to be conscious.
yeah. And often it's a moment. I suppose with cognitive flexibility is allowing you a moment to just say, let's take a helicopter view of this. Let's just do a quick scan. Let's just check that we're on the right direction here. If there's any adjustments being made, we're not saying that we have to change every single time. We're just saying we're open to changing direction if it's absolutely needed.
Yeah. So, it's life is all about yeses and nos. And executive functioning is helps us to decide when we need to pick up the map. Executive functioning helps us decide when we need to focus, when we need to filter.
I think I've got it.
Okay. Let's see what you
Saying
got.
no to assumptions. Okay, because often when you're cognitively inflexible or you've made an assumption, okay? You've assumed that the path is clear, you're on the boat. I've looked on the map that it's clear from here to there, but then something shows up and there's a rock in the way. And you're like, no, there can't be a rock in the way. There's no rock on the chart. But then someone goes, oh, but I think the wind and the current has pushed us to the left there, and that's why the rock's there. We're not where we thought we were. We have
That's
made the
that's
ground.
cool. And there is that expression about assumptions, you know.
Yes, assumptions make an ass of you and me. Is that the
Right.
expression?
Right. Well, and this is the thing is that we just get so we're so rigid.
Yes.
We're so rigid that we don't take into consideration that kind of like the butterfly effect. I love James, I think it's James Gleek. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, but he talks about how a butterfly flapping its wings in China can affect the weather in New York the next day. I mean, there's just too you if you're too rigid about your thinking, you're not taking into consideration all of the little things that are constantly changing the world around us so that we're always having to adapt, right?
Yeah. Okay. So let's say we're working through this as we're talking. That's one of the reasons why we do this podcast, Erica, isn't it? We talk through our thoughts and our experiences and so on, and it grows into something. And I think if I was to summarize this for me, working with your working memory and learning to say no is saying no to packaging, padding. Inhibitory control is no to distractions, and cognitive flexibility is no to assumptions.
Okay.
No packaging, no distractions, no assumptions. And in doing so, you're working with your executive functions of working memory, inhibitory control, and cognitive flexibility.
Very nicely said.
One of the things that comes to mind is no distractions. I think we need to talk about the mobile phone and notifications. I mean, one of the biggest problems with affecting executive function is being distracted by notifications. A Slack notification, an email notification, a text notification, a WhatsApp notification, a weather notification, whatever it is, all these notifications must stop in order for you to
Well,
get stuff done, except for the notifications you really need to be interrupted with.
technology is really interrupting. It's really changed our cognition. And I notice in the morning, it's really hard to resist just looking on my computer
Oh,
just
it
for a
is.
moment.
It
And
is.
then the times when I do that, then I'm like, "Oh, no, I had an appointment at 8:30 and I didn't look at it till 9." So it's like there again, there's a fine line between saying no and yes. It's really infiltrated into our systems and we've become dependent on it. And
Well,
maybe that's something is that we have to be careful not to become overly dependent on technology because yeah, it kind of takes over. But yes, I agree with you. There's such a fine line between blocking these things and not blocking and figuring out which are the ones that you are willing to let interrupt your day and
yeah.
which are the ones that are not allowed to interrupt your day. But it's
Here,
interesting because, of course, the whole thing about technologies, it brings the world into your home and the world is saying, look at me, do this, buy this. And they've done all the research to figure out how to make it addictive and attractive and alluring. And so it's really taxing our ability to fully be the conductor, fully conduct our executive functioning skills because there are
yeah,
like all these little trolls out there
yeah.
trying to pull us into their shop
That's
or
right. Yeah,
whatever.
yeah. It's like you're driving this car and there's, this sign suddenly pops up and, distracts you from the road. Another sign, another
Oh,
sign, another
sometimes
sign.
it even grabs the wheel out of your
That's
hands.
right.
I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah. Or it flutters across your windscreen and gets in your way and
well,
so
you
on.
could think of it as like one of these cars that drives for you. You've decided to get one of these amazing cars that can drive for you, and there are times that you want to drive, and there are times where it wants to drive, and you're like fighting with it.
Well, I do that on my Tesla quite a lot. I'm driving on the Tesla. I've got it on self-driving, and I want to move off a lane, and I have to kind of force it sometimes. No, I do want to move past this lane anyway. But the thing I would highly recommend anyone who's listening is if you've got an iPhone, swipe up on your iPhone, go to settings, scroll down until you see the red notifications icon and then go through every single app that you've got, those 20 or 30 apps in there, switch notifications off for every single one of them, and only keep the notifications on for like text messages and phone calls or something like that, where people really need to break through to you. Switch off notifications for your emails, for WhatsApp, for
You can pick the people that are allowed to interrupt you.
you can, yes. So if you can take control of your notifications like today, right now, that will save you so much time and distraction and enhance your executive functions really quickly. That's one way of saying no. Say no to notifications.
No to right, unless they're the notifications that you need.
Yes. Say yes to notifications that are essential
There you
to
go.
remind you, and no to all other general
The
notifications.
distractors.
They are, yeah.
Yeah, distraction is not something we want. I'm working with a student right now that is just so lost in distractions. And what I was telling him was that really what we want is we don't want distractions, we want freedom. And if you could look at it, because I think so many people are like, oh, you've got to manage your distractions. And I said, instead of
Yeah.
saying managing your distractions, how
Yeah.
about just choosing freedom?
I love it.
We have to be cognitively flexible about how we word this, because if we're always saying, turn off your notifications, it's shoulding, it's annoying. But if we can say, well, what would you like? Do you want to be constantly interrupted, or would you like freedom? And if you're
Yeah.
choosing freedom, then you can limit your notifications
I
so that
love
they're
that. That's
not
great.
taking over your life.
Yes, yes, because notifications are a form of control, which is taking away your freedom.
Yeah.
Whereas, and yeah, I love it. That's brilliant.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a great place to stop. So this was such an interesting discussion, and I guess you guys will all figure out whether we change the title or not. And we very well might. We'll discuss this after we finish our podcast.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Erica, until next time, it's been a great chat.
It has been a great chat. Until next time.
Bye.
Bye. Sponsored by the Executive Functioning Remedial Assessment, an online tool that quickly identifies challenges and delivers targeted strategies for success.
Sponsored by Ivy. Imagine turning your meeting's audio into a live mind map instantly so you remember what matters. It's ideal for students and managers with dyslexia or ADHD. Try Ivy for free now at ivy.app. That's IVVI.app. Thank you for joining us at the Executive Function Brain Trainer podcast.
Check out our show notes for links and resources, and follow us on social media.